In the middle of a ferocious blizzard night, an 11-year-old girl shivered inside a poor cabin, desperately trying to keep her gravely ill grandfather alive with an oxygen tank that was running out. Just when despair hit rock bottom, 15 exhausted Iron Serpents bikers appeared at the door, asking for shelter from the storm. Without hesitation, the little girl opened the door and shared the family's last 2 cans of soup. By the next morning, the roar of more than 100 Harleys echoed through the valley, all of them coming for the girl and the grandfather who had once saved their lives years ago. Before I start the story, what time is it where you are right now? Where are you from? Please drop a comment below and let me know. The Carter family's small log cabin sat alone off Highway 14 in the Bighorn Mountains. And on that night, during the harshest winter 11-year-old Emma Carter had ever known, the brown-eyed girl who always tried to look strong, stood beside her grandfather Frank's bed, listening to each labored broken breath echoing heavily in the freezing old room. Frank, once a long-haul trucker who'd rolled down every back road in the West, now lay helpless beneath a thin blanket, lips cracked and dry, chest heaving with difficulty, while the oxygen tank beside the bed showed only its last few bars, the respirator wheezing faintly, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, as if clinging to the final wisps of air. Emma's mother, Lydia Carter, couldn't make it home that night. The road to Sheridan Memorial Hospital was completely iced over. She texted that she was stuck on an emergency shift and could only pray the cabin stayed warm enough for the 2 of them to hold on. Emma read the message 3 times, then slipped the phone into the pocket of her worn sweater, not wanting her mom to know she was shaking from both cold and fear. The cabin had always been poor, but now it felt emptier than ever after days of non-stop storms. The fridge held only 2 cans of soup and a few slices of hard bread. The kitchen corner had just 3 small logs that Emma had split herself, still not enough to keep the stove going long. The gaps in the old wooden walls whistled whenever the freezing wind pushed through, making the little candle on the table flicker constantly. Frank's medical bills lay scattered on the table, their corners curled from cold and damp. Some pages Lydia tried to hide from Emma, but the girl had still seen the big numbers that made her mother look more exhausted every night. Emma quietly tucked the blanket tighter around her grandfather, then gently closed her small hand around his gradually cooling one. He opened his eyes, gave a weak smile, and tried to speak, his breath coming in broken bursts. "Emma, don't turn off the porch light. Travelers out there might need it." Those words were something he'd said all through Emma's childhood. He used to tell her this cabin had always opened its door to lost motorists, exhausted truckers in snowstorms, young soldiers coming home from distant bases. "Our house is small, but our hearts have to be bigger than any storm," he always said. The porch light is a reminder that there's still one home that never turns anyone away. When she was younger, Emma thought they were just sweet stories, but now between the howling wind outside and the fading hiss of the oxygen machine, she understood why he believed it so deeply. The wind slammed hard against the wooden door, making the hinges rattle with sharp, cold sounds. Emma hugged the oil lantern with both hands, stepped out onto the porch into the skin-cutting freezing wind, shielding the tiny flame so it wouldn't go out, then placed it on the windowsill facing Highway 14, so its faint golden glow became the only signal in the sea of white snow. When she came back inside, she heard Frank coughing violently, a heavy cough that sounded like it was tearing his lungs. She started running to the bed, but suddenly froze when a different sound cut through everything. A low, deep, steady rumble, completely unlike the wind or snapping branches. At first it was faint, as if coming up from beneath the snow-covered ground, then it grew louder, more rhythmic, more urgent, like many metal beasts roaring together. Emma stood frozen in the middle of the room, trying to separate the wind from the sound of engines echoing closer. Then suddenly a blinding white beam flashed through the frosted window, so bright it instantly bathed the small room in cold light. Emma walked slowly to the door, her tiny hand running along the icy glass edge, and when she wiped away a circle of frost, she saw them, headlights so powerful they pierced straight through the blowing snow. A long metallic roar rose from the highway, then another, then many more in succession, deep and heavy like thunder rolling underground. And then through the thick wall of snow, the shapes of massive machines began to emerge. Dark silhouettes pushed forward against the storm, helmets coated in ice, shoulders draped in thick leather, wheels slicing through snow into swirling white spirals under the headlights. 15 Harley-Davidsons. Emma counted them one by one, moved like a pack of metal monsters, slow but unstoppable, their engines thundering through the dark valley as if waking the entire Bighorn Range. When the lead bike slid gently up to the porch, chunks of ice shattered against the window, making Emma jump back a step. At that exact moment, Frank started coughing violently again behind her and turned his head toward the window. The headlight lit up his face, making his old eyes widen in fear. He struggled to breathe, voice trembling between coughs. "Emma, close the curtains now. Don't let them see you." But Emma stayed there, heart pounding, staring at the huge dark figures stopping in front of her house, terrified yet unable to look away from the strange sight in the middle of the blizzard night. The bikers started climbing off their bikes, broad shoulders, leather jackets coated in ice, helmets white with snow, breath coming out in thick clouds. They looked both fierce and exhausted. Some limped from the cold, some shook so hard they could barely pull off their gloves. Leading them was Redwood Jake, taller than the rest. Long dark red hair stiff with snow, beard frozen into white crystals. His gray-blue eyes looked up at the cabin, not aggressive, not threatening, just the eyes of a man who had reached his absolute limit. Jake walked up the steps, sinking deep into the snow, then raised his hand and knocked 3 times, deep, weak but urgent knocks. In that moment, Emma felt her whole body tighten. She could hear her own heartbeat, Frank's broken breathing, the storm whipping the walls. Fear flooded her, the instinctive fear of seeing huge tattooed men in the middle of a blizzard night. She wanted to run and pull the curtains like Grandpa said, wanted to hide behind the stove, wanted to pretend no one was home. But then she saw Jake's hand trembling from the cold, and his eyes that held no darkness, only exhaustion and the thinnest thread of hope. Fear gripped her like the freezing wind, while compassion warmed inside her like a small flame. Her hand shook but didn't leave the latch. They just want to survive the night, Emma told herself, and that thought was stronger than the fear. She took a deep breath, turned the latch. The door flew open. Icy wind slashed her face, snow poured onto the floor, and the cabin's golden light fell across 15 ice-covered faces standing silently. The instant Emma swung the door wide, a knife-like gust of freezing wind blasted into the cabin, forcing her to lean forward to keep her balance. And in that moment the huge dark figures on the porch began to move. Redwood Jake stepped in first, ducking low so his head wouldn't hit the frame. A frame built for normal people, not a biker over 6.5 feet tall. As he crossed the threshold, the stiff leather of his jacket scraped together with heavy sounds, and chunks of ice on his shoulders fell to the wooden floor in loud cracks. A wave of warmth from inside the cabin rushed over Jake's face, highlighting the sharp lines and the dark circles of exhaustion under his eyes. Behind Jake, the others filed in one by one, the tiny cabin seeming to shrink with every giant who ducked through the door. One man with tattoos covering his whole neck had to turn sideways because his shoulders were too wide. Another tilted his helmet to squeeze inside. They moved slowly, as if afraid their very presence might damage the simple space. In seconds, the little house that had felt big enough to hold the whole winter became suffocatingly crowded with 15 massive bodies, dripping leather jackets, heavy boots caked in snow, the smell of cold wind so strong that Emma saw the oil lamp flicker from the draft they brought in. A younger biker, awkward and gangly, accidentally dropped a big slab of ice from his elbow. The crash made him flinch. "Sorry, kid. I didn't mean to." "Hey, Rick." The man behind him nudged his shoulder and whispered, half scolding but protective, "Easy, man. This is the little girl's house." Another huge biker with a thick beard hiding half his face saw the ice on the floor, bent down, picked up every piece, stacked them neatly in a corner, and muttered, "Don't want to mess up the kid's floor." The rest stood shoulder to shoulder, almost touching the ceiling, trying to make themselves smaller so Emma could move, as if their instinct was to protect anything smaller than them in the room. The contrast between their fierce appearance, scars, tattoos, leather, the lingering roar of engines still clinging to them, and their careful, polite, almost shy behavior, made Emma forget for a moment how terrified she had been just minutes earlier. She immediately ran to the little cabinet by the stove, bare feet stinging on the cold wood, searching for anything that could warm them. Old towels, a couple of thin blankets, a thermos of warm water she had boiled earlier, trying to keep Grandpa warm. "Uncles, do you need these?" Emma asked, voice small but clear. Jake looked at her, nodded, but didn't take anything right away. Instead, he crouched down to her level like a father talking to his child. "Thank you, little one. We'll only take what you say is okay. We won't touch anything else." A long-haired biker whose face was still covered in snow was shaking so hard he couldn't unzip his jacket. When he saw Emma bringing a blanket, He immediately stepped back, half a step, and raised both hands. No, I'm all dirty. I'll stand somewhere else. But Emma just smiled and draped the blanket over his arm like she was helping a giant child, leaving him stunned for a second before he mumbled, "Thank you, kid." Another man with his left hand wrapped in wet cloth tried not to let melting snow drip on the old rug, standing stiff as if every movement might bother the hosts. One limping biker walked to the wall to lean on it, but before leaning fully, he turned to Emma and asked quietly, "Is it okay if I lean here, kid?" In the freezing cabin, Emma realized they weren't just the big scary men everyone thought. They were soaked, exhausted people battered by the storm until their tough exteriors had cracked. And beneath that armor was a strange politeness, a deep respect for a little girl they had never met. Back in the bedroom, Grandpa Frank was still breathing heavily, straining to see into the living room. But when he saw the scene, tattooed men trying to keep every inch of his floor clean, he didn't dare object anymore. Emma set the thermos of warm water on the table. Steam rose gently. "Uncles, drink this to warm up," she said, her voice still trembling but full of clear determination. In that moment, inside the cramped cabin lit only by the small oil lamp and the headlights of the Harleys still shining in from outside, Emma Carter, the 11-year-old girl holding out a thermos with her tiny hands, brought complete silence to 15 Iron Serpents bikers. A strange quiet fell over everyone, as if the blizzard outside no longer mattered. And in the middle of that perfect contrast, rough looks on the outside, kindness on the inside, a strange feeling crept into the cabin, a feeling of safety, of humanity, of everyone in the room, understanding that this child had just done something incredibly brave. Emma didn't know that this moment, this small act, would be the reason why tomorrow hundreds of motorcycles would line up in front of her house. While the 15 huge men tried to fold themselves into the tiny cabin, as if afraid they might snap one of the old walls, Emma ran to the little kitchen, opened the cupboard, searched desperately, and finally found only the last 2 cans of soup. She picked them up, the metal so cold it numbed her hands, then turned back to look at the bikers, their exhausted faces, lips purple from the cold, hands trembling from the endless ride through the storm. Without thinking twice, Emma turned on the burner, poured both cans into the pot, added a little water to stretch it, stirred gently, and the first real warmth rose up, making her eyes sting. Jake saw it, stepped closer, but stopped a few feet away, as if scared his own shadow was too big and might fall on her. "Emma," he said softly, voice low and rough like wind over rock, "you don't have to. We'll be fine. Keep it for your family." Emma just shook her head without turning around and answered quietly, "Grandpa told me, if someone needs help, you help." In that moment, Jake had no words. He just stood there, his eyes softening like snow melting on hot stone. Behind them, a giant biker with a thick brown beard, everyone called him Bear, spotted Emma's little stuffed bear lying forgotten on the chair, one ear torn. He looked at the toy, looked at Emma, then asked in a voice afraid of disturbing her, "Kid, mind if I hold it for a minute?" Emma nodded hesitantly, and in just a few minutes, those huge hands that had wrenched truck bolts, thrown punches on the highway, lived through the roughest years of biker life, used those same hands to sew tiny careful stitches, tying each knot so gently that Emma held her breath watching. Bear worked with the concentration of a surgeon, saving a tiny heart. When he handed the bear back, the ear neatly sewn with black thread, Emma hugged it tight to her chest, whispered "thank you," and Bear suddenly blushed, scratched his head, and stepped back behind the others, as if embarrassed he'd let his soft side show. Nearby, the youngest biker in the group, the one with light blue eyes that still looked a little stunned, named Dusty, sat down beside Emma while she ladled soup into mismatched old bowls. "Emma, how old are you?" he asked quietly. 11, she answered, placing a bowl in front of him. "And you?" Dusty gave a small laugh, the first since they'd arrived. 25. "I still kind of feel like a kid compared to some of these guys." He jerked his head toward the older bikers, and Emma giggled. In that little laugh, the cold in the cabin eased a bit. Dusty told her they were coming back from a memorial ride in Rapid City for their fallen brother Hawk Lawson, a legend in the biker world spoken of with the deepest respect. Emma heard the name without knowing fate was about to tie it forever to her own story. While she refilled the thermos with warm water, she told Dusty about the cabin, about her mom working herself to the bone at the hospital, about how Grandpa Frank used to save people on the road. When she got to the part about Frank once stopping in a blizzard to help a stranger fix a tire, Dusty went quiet, trying to hide his expression behind the patchy beard on his chin. "Your grandpa sounds like a lot of us owe him," he whispered. In the corner of the room, Grandpa Frank opened his eyes and looked at the strange scene before him. Tattooed bikers crowded around the little stove, huge hands cradling bowls of hot soup like treasure, weathered faces showing gratitude without a word. And Emma, the tiny girl standing in the middle of them, not an ounce of fear, only focus and unconditional kindness. A tired but proud smile flickered across his lips. He lifted a trembling hand to call her. She ran over and took it. "You not scared, baby?" he asked softly. Emma shook her head. "No, Grandpa. They need our house." Frank let out a relieved breath, as if the heaviest weight had been lifted. But his strength was clearly fading. Every breath a new battle, and though his eyes still shone with faith, his body no longer had the power to fight the knife-sharp cold sneaking through every crack in the cabin walls. The little stove crackled as the last logs flared, pushing the darkness back a little more, but the wind outside grew even fiercer, slamming the wooden walls as if trying to swallow everything inside. Snow came in long, violent waves, rattling the windows in rhythm. The bikers' shadows stretched across the floor like remnants of a battle just survived. When the last bowl of soup had been passed from hand to hand, a strange quiet settled over the cabin. No longer weary tension left, only exhaustion and the relief of surviving one more night. Then Moose, the biggest man in the group, whose shoulders took up nearly half of Frank's old armchair, let out a low sigh and said in a voice like distant thunder that had lost its power, "2 months ago I lost my little brother in a mountain road wreck in Montana. That night, the weather was just like tonight." The heavy words stopped every conversation. Moose stared into the small flames as if seeing his whole past in them. Another biker, shaved head, wolf tattoo on his neck, nodded like he knew that pain too well, and added, "I came back from Afghanistan 3 years ago. The fighting wasn't the hardest part. It's quiet nights like this. The quieter it is outside, the louder it gets in here." He touched the tattoo on his neck, hand trembling not from cold but from memory. A younger one, not Dusty, but the one with the saddest dark eyes in the group, spoke as if afraid someone might hear. "I almost gave up once. One night, I rode straight into a storm like this just to forget everything. If I hadn't found the club, I wouldn't be here today." The confession dropped into the small cabin like a stone through thin ice. Emma sat among them, hugging her newly sewn bear, eyes wide not from fear anymore, but from compassion. She didn't fully understand adult stories of trauma, loss, brothers who never came home, but she felt the sadness in their voices the same way she felt the storm tearing at the mountains, without needing to see it. Dusty saw her looking and gave a reassuring smile. "We look pretty scary, huh?" Emma tilted her head. "No, just sadder than I thought." Her answer silenced the whole room. Eyes that had seen blood, steel, and endless highways now looked at the little girl as if she'd spoken the thing they'd never dared say out loud. Jake stood leaning against the wall by the door, firelight, cutting sharp light and shadow across his face, making the scar from jaw to temple look even meaner. But his eyes were soft and deep, and Emma felt like she was seeing a completely different man inside that leather jacket. He watched each of his brothers finally speak the losses they'd carried for years, then looked at Emma. "This kid," Jake said, voice low and steady like an idling engine, "just saved all of us." Moose gave a soft chuckle and shook his head. "A tiny little girl saved us?" Jake didn't smile. He looked straight at Emma, deadly serious, and the cabin went still for several seconds. "If she hadn't opened that door, we'd have frozen solid out there. 15 grown men, saved by one child." No one argued. No one hid it. They knew it was true. Outside, the storm raged harder every minute. Wind whipped sideways along the cabin walls. Snow hit the roof in heavy clumps, and the metal on the Harleys on the porch cried out under fresh layers of ice. Emma listened to every story, round eyes moving from face to face. In those stories she saw wounds no medicine could heal, wounds of the soul, of men who'd lived too long in darkness and distance, wounds of hearts that had lost so much yet still clung to the last scraps of humanity. And when she placed her small hand on Moose's giant one to comfort him without hesitation, she had no idea that simple act made the whole room stop breathing for a second. A child trusted them. A child wasn't afraid of them. A child looked past the leather armor, tattoos, beards, scars, wind, blood, and saw the people underneath. Outside, the blizzard screamed louder than ever, but inside the cabin, between the small fire and Frank's labored breathing, the cold was pushed back by something no one expected. The kindness of one little girl and the silent gratitude of men who thought they'd never need anyone's help again. Emma didn't know that the moment Jake said, "This kid just saved all of us," everything had already started to change. because bikers never forget a debt. And tonight that debt began writing a new destiny for the Carter family. When the heavy, pain-filled stories finally faded into silence, only the blizzard remained, lashing the cabin roof like a night sky whip. Jake pushed off his knees, stood up straight, rolled his shoulders to ease the ache of the long ride. Firelight painted stark light and shadow across his scarred face. He scanned the tiny cabin. Poor but warm, thin curtains, warped boards, old things cared for by hands that had little yet always gave. Then his eyes stopped on something he could hardly believe he was seeing. On the wooden wall above the chair Frank always sat in hung an old frame, wood faded, glass fogged with age, but inside the picture was heartbreakingly clear. A strong young man standing beside a red Peterbilt, hand on the shoulder of another young biker, both of them grinning like they'd just cheated death on the highway. Jake froze, breath catching in his throat. He stepped closer, lifted the frame into the orange firelight, eyes widening with every second. "No way," he whispered. Moose raised an eyebrow at Jake. Dusty leaned forward, trying to see better. Emma walked over, curious. "You know my grandpa?" Jake didn't answer right away. He gently touched the glass over the younger man. Frank, 20 years ago, thick black hair, built like a pillar, eyes bright and a smile that had never learned surrender. But what stunned Jake wasn't Frank. It was the man beside him. Younger, wild blonde hair, grin so wide his eyes were slits, right arm slung over Frank's shoulder like blood brothers, scrawled on the back in faded marker, "Frank and Hawk, Winter 04. Jake's finger touched the name, hand shaking. "Holy hell," he breathed, stepping back as if punched in the chest. Moose came closer, glanced at the photo and froze, eyes bigger than anyone had ever seen them. "Jake, is that?" Jake nodded slowly. "It's Hawk. Hawk Lawson." The cabin went dead silent for several seconds, only the wind howling like an echo from the past. Dusty broke it first. "No way. Hawk told us about a man who saved his life. But this is the place." Jake gripped the frame tighter, eyes never leaving young Frank's face. 20 years ago, Jake began, voice so low Emma had to hold her breath to hear. One winter night in Wyoming, blizzard just like tonight. Hawk broke down on Highway 14, bike dead, no lights, no traffic, temperature that could kill a man in hours. He said he was drifting off in the cab, until a red rig stopped right in front of him. Jake pointed at Frank in the photo. "This man." He stopped, dragged Hawk out, brought him into this cabin, warmed him up, made hot soup, treated him like family. That whole storm night Hawk wasn't sure he'd live if it weren't for Frank Carter. Every word hit the cabin floor like hammer blows, making even the toughest men who seemed unbreakable lower their heads. Moose sniffed quietly, hiding emotion. The shaved-head biker stared out the window to avoid eye contact. Dusty wiped his face, sighed, voice thick. "Hawk said the name Frank Carter so many times. We never knew he was real. Thought it was just a legend passed down." Emma hugged her bear tighter, eyes huge, looking from Jake to her grandfather lying just a few feet away, breathing weakly, unaware that these men saw him as a living legend. "Wait," Moose said, scanning the cabin. "If this is Frank Carter, then," he swallowed hard, "we're standing in that house." The house Hawk called Beacon Cabin, the light in the dark. Every biker turned at once to look at Emma, as if she'd just flipped a switch that lit up a piece of their history they never thought they'd see with their own eyes. Outside, the wind screamed louder, snow pounding the walls like war drums, but inside a far bigger storm was rising in every man's chest, the realization they were standing where their legend began. Jake looked at Emma, gray-blue eyes holding something deeper than gratitude, an oath, a reverence, a debt no one in that room would ever let fade. He carefully placed the photo back on the wall, straightened it, then turned to the whole group. "Everybody get it." He pointed toward the bedroom where Frank lay resting. "That man in there is the reason we got Hawk for 15 more years. The reason Hawk became the president of our chapter. The reason we got to become a family." Moose placed a hand over his heart, and now, his granddaughter just saved us again. The little cabin seemed to stop breathing. Emma looked at each of them, one wiping his eyes, one clenching his jaw, one staring at his scarred hands as if remembering an entire lifetime on the road. And in that exact moment, the moment they realized they weren't just in some poor cabin, but in the house that once saved a legend, they all understood what came next wasn't just helping, it was repaying a sacred debt 20 years in the making. The silence after Jake's declaration hung over the cabin like a thick blanket. Then, as if a lock on memory had just been opened, Every biker started looking around the house with completely different eyes, no longer wary, no longer afraid of disturbing anything, but with a deep reverence for a place they never expected to be blessed enough to step into. Moose gently turned the chair he was sitting in, as if scared of scratching something sacred, then scratched his head and spoke low, afraid Frank, lying just a few feet away, might hear and panic. "I think I met him too." The whole group turned to Moose. The giant man who rarely spoke now looked awkward, like a 2-meter-tall kid caught stealing cookies. "Back when I was young, just joined the club, my first Harley died on the pass right around here," Moose went on, staring down at his soaked boots. "It was cold like tonight. I thought I was done for, no one was coming. Then a red rig stopped. The driver got out, brought a tow cable and told me with a grin to try starting it again. I didn't know it was Frank, but..." Moose looked up, eyes glassy with disbelief. The way he talked, the way he smiled, it matched the photo on the wall perfectly. Another biker, the one with the huge wolf tattoo across his neck, jumped in right away. "Hold up, did he ever give somebody a hand-drawn map?" Dusty whipped around. "Hand-drawn map?" The wolf tattoo guy nodded. 2012. I got lost running from a storm in Montana. No GPS, no cell service. I found a little cabin because of the porch light. An old man opened the door, made me coffee, took an old piece of sandpaper and drew the shortest route to Cheyenne by hand. He smiled faintly and shook his head. "I still have that paper." The youngest biker in the group suddenly pushed himself up on his knees, body trembling a little, and said quietly, "I met him too." The whole group turned again, even more stunned this time. "The day I left home when I thought I had nothing left to lose," he said, voice so low he was almost afraid someone would hear. "I rode into a storm, couldn't even see the road through my tears. I stopped at a cabin with a light on. He came out, gave me a thick blanket and said, 'Nobody's tough all the time, son, but anybody can live through tonight.' I never forgot those words." He bowed his head. Tears fell onto his snow-soaked gloves. "I never knew his name. Now I do." A heavy breath came from the back. Bear, the huge, rough man who'd fought in more places than Emma had ever heard city's name, slowly unwrapped his wet neck scarf, wiped his face and spoke in a gravelly voice. "I met him in 2010. Brakes went out on the pass. I thought that was my last day, but he drove that red rig out and blocked the road, so I crashed into his trailer instead of going over the cliff." The group went dead quiet. Moose let out a soft curse, not angry, just shocked. "He saved you from dying, Bear. The man's a living saint." Bear put his hand over his heart and spoke very slowly. He said, "I don't care who you are, but you deserve one more day." The little cabin choked on shock. 15 men who had survived crashes, death, war, storms were now sitting in this poor house, and realizing many of them owed their lives to the very man lying behind that thin wooden wall. Emma hugged her bear tighter than ever, eyes wider than they'd ever been. "Grandpa saved that many people?" she asked, voice shaking a little. Dusty turned to her, smiling through red eyes. "Emma, your grandpa wasn't just kind. He was the Wyoming mountain road legend. Travelers called him the mountain guide. The one who showed the way, the one who pulled them out of the storm." Jake took his helmet off and set it on the floor, a gesture so rare the whole room went silent again. He spoke slowly, voice deep like an engine idling in his chest. "Your grandpa didn't just save Hawk. He saved a bunch of the men in this room, in different years, in different places, never knowing they'd end up brothers." Moose nodded hard, like he was driving the period home. "And tonight you, Emma Carter, saved us. You." The eyes of all 15 bikers fell on Emma. No fear left, only reverence, gratitude and something else, a silent promise. Outside the blizzard still screamed, but inside the cabin the bigger storm had broken, the storm of suspicion and fear. Emma looked around at the weathered faces, scars, tattoos, marks of long roads, but in their eyes right now was only one thing she understood instantly. They hadn't come here as strangers, they had come home. And for the first time in her life, Emma truly understood who her grandfather was, not just a sick old man, but the one who had lit the darkest nights for countless lives on the road. The little porch light Emma had turned on tonight was the last flame of a legend, and now that flame had been passed to an entire pack of Iron Serpents sitting in her cabin, men who never forgot a debt. The moment Moose finished speaking, a dry, heavy, suffocating cough exploded from the bed behind the thin wall, so violent the whole cabin shook. Emma jumped, dropped her bear, and bolted to Frank. Jake and 2 others were on their feet in an instant, faces tight. Frank lay on his side, clutching his chest, breath ragged like it was tearing apart in his throat. The oxygen tank beside him gave a small alarm. The red light blinked frantically, empty. "Grandpa!" Emma screamed, voice breaking with terror. She tried to lift his head, tiny cold hands shaking under his neck as if letting go would drop him into a bottomless pit. Jake dropped to his knees beside her, signaled Dusty to open the spare tank, but when they checked, Dusty's face went white. Only a few minutes left. The cabin that had been warm from body heat suddenly turned ice cold, not from winter but from death creeping into every breath of air. Emma started sobbing hard, tears pouring onto Frank's hand. She called his name and tried to hold his shoulders, but his trembling was too much for her little hands. "Grandpa. No, Grandpa. Don't leave me." Her voice shattered like an overtight string. Jake put a steady hand on her shoulder, voice low but solid as rock. "Emma, look at me. Your grandpa's still here. We're gonna keep him warm." He turned and barked orders. "Moose, Bear, build that fire higher. Every blanket we've got, bring it here. Dusty, my jacket and yours on him now." No one hesitated. In under 10 seconds, the 15 Iron Serpents scattered through the tiny cabin like a trained rescue team. Moose and Bear threw the last logs into the stove. Flames roared up bright orange, tattooed arms glowing like the cabin was being fed new life. Another man opened his pack and draped his thickest jacket over Frank's legs. A biker with a chain necklace warmed Frank's hands with his own breath to keep blood flowing. 2 more stood blocking the windows against drafts. Emma watched, heart still pounding but eyes wide in awe. These huge tattooed men who had looked like living storms were now kneeling before her grandfather, gentler than any nurse her mom had ever described. Frank struggled to open his eyes, saw Emma and the blurred shapes of the bikers around him. He managed a tiny exhausted smile, almost invisible. "Don't cry, Emma. I'm still here." Emma buried her face in his hand, sobbing. "I'm so scared. I'm so scared." Jake rested a hand on her back. His voice turned warm in a way it had never been on the road. "Little girl, you're not alone. Listen to me. We're here. All of us are here." An older biker with silver in his beard suddenly stood. "I've got the fire. I'll turn the logs every 10 minutes. Fire does not go out tonight." Another raised his hand. "I'm with him." A third. "I've got the door. No wind gets in." And then, like a vow, no one spoke aloud. They formed a circle around Frank's bed, each man taking a position, each with a job, as if Frank were their leader, and keeping him alive was their highest mission. Emma wiped her eyes, looked from face to face, then at Jake. Do you think Grandpa will make it through the night?" Jake didn't lie. He crouched down, hand on her shoulder, voice slow and honest. "We'll keep him warm. We'll keep him breathing. And he won't have to fight alone. That's all any man needs to live through a storm." Outside, wind screamed so hard the cabin tilted with every gust. The spare tank ticked down like a countdown clock. But inside, around Frank's bed stood a circle of bikers, men who had survived war, wrecks, and loss, now pouring every last ounce of strength into keeping one old man alive through the night. And Emma, in the middle of that circle, felt for the first time she wasn't alone, not because the storm had weakened, but because she had found family in men anyone else would have been terrified of. That night, the night the oxygen was almost gone, the worst storm of the season, the night real fear squeezed her heart, was also the night the bikers proved kindness never disappears. It just rides the long road and comes back exactly where it started. While the biker circle still tended the fire, kept Frank warm and breathing, Jake stood up straight, glanced at his old watch, then quickly toward the door. The wind outside still slammed the cabin so hard the door rattled like it wanted to fly off. Frost coated the window edges white and thick. Still, Jake took a deep breath, tightened his jacket straps and said quietly, "I have to step out for a bit." Moose frowned instantly, voice like boulders rolling downhill. "You crazy? Wind out there will flip a semi. You walk out, that's suicide." The wolf tattoo biker shook his head hard. "Stay inside, Jake. We're barely holding on in here. Going out now is the dumbest thing possible." But Jake just pulled his helmet on, slow but certain. "I have to call our people," he said, tone leaving no room for argument. "There's something I have to do before dawn." Those words carried the determination of a man who had decided something bigger than himself. Emma looked over from Frank's bedside, face full of worry. "Where are you going?" "The storm's still bad." Jake knelt to her level. His gray-blue eyes reflected the stove fire, glowing strangely in the chaos. "Don't worry," he said, softer than she'd ever heard him. I'm not going far. Just need to get a cell signal. Mountains and the storm are jamming everything. I have to reach the ridge out there. Emma held her breath. But it's so cold out there. Jake placed a warm hand on her shoulder. I've survived colder than this. I promise I'll be back. Moose still wouldn't let it go. Wind gusts tonight are 60 miles an hour. A man on foot can't. Jake turned ice in his voice. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I'm going. The cabin went dead quiet. No Iron Serpent dared argue further. They all recognized that look in Jake's eyes, an order not from the mouth but from the heart. An older biker slowly walked over, put a hand on Jake's shoulder and whispered, "If you're doing what I think, you're doing the right thing." Jake gave a small nod, like two men sharing a secret not meant for anyone else. He turned, opened the door. Wind blasted in, nearly snuffing the fire. Snow flew everywhere, landing on the shoulders of the bikers near the door. Emma clutched her bear, ran a few steps after him. "Uncle Jake, you will come back, right?" For one brief moment, Jake looked back at her through the blinding storm, his eyes under the helmet brim absolutely certain. "I still owe you and your grandpa a promise," he said. "I never break a promise." Then the door slammed shut, the cabin shaking from the impact. Emma ran straight to the window and watched. Through the frost and thick snow she could barely see flickers of light as Jake hunched against the wind, taking heavy steps into the endless white. The wind was so strong he had to stop several times, grabbing trees or the porch railing before moving on. The cabin lights faded behind him. Emma pressed her whole face to the freezing glass, heart squeezed tight. What is he doing?" she whispered. Moose stood behind her, looking out but saying nothing. The wolf tattoo biker folded his arms and gave only a vague answer. "Jake's doing what Jake has to do." Dusty gently put a hand on Emma's shoulder, light as if afraid to startle her. "Kid, don't worry. He's the most stubborn man in the chapter. Nothing takes him down." "But why does he have to go out right now?" Emma asked, tears rolling from worry. Dusty swallowed hard. He clearly knew the answer but couldn't say it. Moose turned away, cracked his knuckles, and muttered like rolling mountain stone. "Because he won't watch a kid lose the only family she has left. Not ever again." The cabin fell into heavy silence. Outside, Jake's shape vanished completely into the storm. All that remained was the wind howling like the screams of souls trapped in the bighorns. Emma stood trembling, staring into the white void, not knowing that the moment Jake walked into the blizzard was the moment the wheels of fate started turning on something. No one in the cabin could have imagined. A call that would cut through half the mountain range, waking an entire pack of sleeping iron wolves. And tomorrow they would come. In numbers. Emma still had her face pressed to the cold glass, little handprints on the frost, eyes straining through the endless swirling snow for any sign of Jake. But outside there was only wind and snow twisting like white dragons around the mountainside. The cabin shook with every blast. And even though the bikers tried to stay calm so Emma wouldn't be more scared, the whole room was coated in worry as thick as the snow outside. Just when Emma was almost losing hope, wondering if Jake could even survive that night, a different sound cut through. Not wind, not breaking branches, but an engine, a lone truck engine growling desperately through deep snow. Moose's head snapped up first. "That's not a Harley," he said quietly. Half suspicious, half alert. Dusty moved to the window, wiped the glass with his wet sleeve to see better. Golden headlights pierced the blizzard like the eye of a beast crawling closer. Emma held her breath. The sound of tires fighting thick snow, the engine choking in the cold. Then an old pickup with South Dakota plates burst out of the storm and slid sideways into the snowy yard in front of the cabin. The door flew open and a huge man stepped down into the snow, thick jacket, beard full of ice. But the second he was steady, he turned toward the cabin, eyes lighting up like he'd found something lost years ago. He yelled into the wind, "Frank Carter lives here, right? I got the call. I heard, and I came." Moose almost dropped the log he was holding. Dusty looked at Emma in disbelief. The man stumbled to the door, pounded 3 times, and when Emma cracked it open he bowed his head low. "Name's Walter Briggs, 2009. My rig flipped on the pass. Your grandpa pulled me out." He leaned on the doorframe, breath coming in long white clouds. "If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be standing here." He stepped inside, hot tears melting the ice in his beard, and added only, "I owe him my life." They barely had time to close the door before another low rumble came from farther away. Dusty spun around, eyes huge. No way. This time it wasn't one vehicle. It was 2, then 3, then 4. Headlights appeared through the storm, like stars falling down the mountainside. An SUV from Colorado, a Jeep from Montana, a Dodge pickup from Nebraska, a beat-up old van from Casper. One by one they punched through the blizzard as if pulled by an invisible force that would not let them stop. When the doors opened and people stepped out, they all shared one thing: the frantic, determined look of people running not to escape, but to save. The man from Colorado charged onto the porch, jacket still dripping cold. "I'm Jake Morgan. Frank saved me and my daughter in 2015. Without him we wouldn't be alive." The man from Montana dropped to his knees right on the steps. "I got lost in a storm. He gave me a hand-drawn map. Nobody else would have done that." The man from Nebraska hugged Emma so hard Moose had to steady them. "Your grandpa pulled my truck out of a ditch when I was 19. I never forgot." The cabin, already crowded, grew even tighter as people, breaths and stories poured in like snow through every crack. Emma stood in the middle of the crowd, tiny like one spark beside dozens of torches, eyes shining with emotion and confusion. She had never seen so many people in her house. They squeezed together, slipped on snow, peeled off soaked jackets covered in ice and mud, but every face glowed with a light that didn't come from the fire. It came from gratitude. And then, when the rumbling still hadn't stopped, a deeper, heavier roar rose from the distance, like a metal army on the move. Moose ran to the window. Eyes that were used to highway storms now went wide like a kid watching fireworks. Who the hell did Jake call? A long line of headlights appeared along the snow-covered road. Not one, not 5, not 10, dozens. Semi-engines, off-road Jeep growls, the V-twin thunder of a few Harleys still crawling forward. A man from the Wyoming Department of Transportation stepped out in a reflective jacket and yelled into the wind. "Carter helped me in 2007 when my snowplow broke down. I heard I couldn't not come." The cabin practically exploded with the heat of stories shouted all at once. "He saved my mom. He fixed my brakes. He turned around 30 minutes just to get me to a hospital. He loaned me gas money. He stopped in a blizzard just to ask if I needed help." Emma spun in circles, ears full of voices, falling snow, opening doors, relieved breaths, the howling storm. She couldn't understand everything, couldn't remember who said what, but one thing Emma felt clearer than anything: Grandpa Frank wasn't just her grandfather. He was a landmark on this whole road, the man dozens of people had leaned on to survive one hard day. And now all of them, from all over Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Colorado, had driven through the storm to give back what they had carried in their hearts for years, a debt of gratitude still unpaid. Moose, the strongest man among them, had to step into a corner and cover his face to hide the emotion rising. Dusty put a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Kid, do you know what you're looking at?" Emma shook her head, clear eyes looking up at him. Dusty crouched down, voice low but clear above the wind. "This is how the world says thank you to your grandpa." A woman stepped forward, long hair whipping in the snowy wind, knelt in front of Emma, and placed a hand over her own heart. "You are Frank's last light. We came because of you." The cabin was no longer a poor little house on the side of the road. It had become a lighthouse in the storm, where the light one man had given others had spread like ripples on water, pulling dozens of people from everywhere to gather around an 11-year-old girl. And Emma, standing in that sea of people, felt something she had never felt in her life. She was not alone, not one bit, not ever again. While the cabin was overflowing with people, voices, breaths, and the warmth of debts of gratitude pouring in from all over the mountains, a different sound suddenly rolled through the valley like thunder stretched out for minutes, no longer scattered vehicles, but a ground-shaking simultaneous roar of so many heavy engines that the cabin's window glass vibrated like it was about to explode. Moose jumped to his feet, eyes wide as if he'd seen a ghost, and bolted to the window. What the hell? The wind outside was completely drowned out, and from inside the blizzard came light. Not one beam, not a few headlights like before, but an entire ribbon of light stretching far, so strong it cut through the thick layers of snow and lit up the whole iced-over tree line. Then the sound rose all at once, echoing off the mountain walls like a metal choir. Emma felt the ground beneath her feet tremble, first lightly, then stronger still. Moose turned back to the room, face pale but eyes blazing. That's a convoy." Dusty swallowed hard, voice shaking. "No, not just any convoy. That's—" He didn't finish, because right then, out of the white sea of snow, the first Harleys burst forward like giant iron beasts, their headlights blazing into a streak like glowing lava in the winter night. Behind them came more Harleys, row after row, seemingly endless. Massive dark figures cutting through the wind, masks, goggles, scarves, leather jackets coated in ice, riding in tight formation like an army. Emma stood open-mouthed at the unbelievable sight before her eyes. 100 Harley-Davidsons charging through the blizzard straight to her front door. Not a movie scene. Not imagination. Real. The 15 bikers inside the cabin went dead silent. Moose let out a long breath. "Jake? You called everybody? You called the whole Western chapter?" An older biker put both hands over his chest. "No, not just one chapter. I see Cheyenne Patches, Denver, Salt Lake, Lord, even Kansas." Outside, the Harley convoy began to slow, tires plowing through deep snow, throwing up white spirals like smoke from a giant beast. They didn't shut off all at once, but the engines gradually quieted like a steel heart slowing after the longest ride of its life. The man from South Dakota standing beside Emma, eyes shining. "Kid, do you know what you're witnessing? This happens once in a biker's lifetime." Then, like a wave crashing onto shore, every rider stepped off, boots hitting the wet snow with heavy, powerful thuds. One by one, huge figures in leather bearing Iron Serpents patches from countless chapters: Black Hills, Wyoming Ridge, Salt Lake Basin, Northern Colorado, Nebraska Plains, Montana Winter Wolves, Arizona Border. Each chapter a legend. Each biker, a story. And now they stood on Emma's land, wind so strong the ice on their hair fell like stardust, yet none of them shivered or complained about the weather. Every single one looked up at the little cabin with the eyes of men standing before something sacred. The man leading the convoy, as tall as Moose but with a longer beard, stanced solid like a Viking warrior, removed his goggles, face scratched raw by the blizzard but eyes sharp blue, and stepped forward. "I'm Odin Klein," he said loudly, voice carrying over the wind. "President, Iron Serpents, Wyoming Ridge." He looked around, deep and solemn, then bowed his head at the cabin door. Another biker, the most heavily tattooed, stepped up, wiping ice from his beard. "We heard Redwood's call, and Redwood never calls unless it's life or death." Emma's heart clenched at Jake's name. She ran to the door, eyes wide, and right then heavy footsteps sounded from the back of the pack. A familiar figure, tall, broad-shouldered, dark red hair matted with snow, emerged through the ranks like a general returning from the storm. Jake, his face red from cold, eyebrows frosted, lips purple but eyes burning bright as fire. Emma burst into tears, flung the door open and tried to run out, but Moose caught her, not to stop her but to shield her from the wind. Jake looked at Emma and gave one small nod, his silent, "I kept my promise." He turned to the more than 100 bikers standing in the snow, 100 faces, 100 leather jackets, 100 hearts beating as one. Jake drew a deep breath and spoke loud enough for the wind itself to pause and listen. "Tonight, the Carter family gave 15 of us a roof. A child opened the door and saved our lives. The storm still howled, snow still fell, but every biker stood straighter, eyes fixed on Emma." Jake continued, voice stronger, each word carved into the ice. "And this house belongs to Frank Carter." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd, shock, reverence, disbelief. Odin Klein was the first to understand. Frank Carter, the mountain road guide, mountain guide, many others nodded at once, some placing hands over hearts, some bowing their heads low. Jake lowered his voice, but the steel in it cut like a blade. "The Carter family, from this moment forward, is Iron Serpents family." A young biker from Colorado shouted, "Frank Carter's blood is our blood." One from Montana roared, "Nobody touches them. Ever." Over 100 voices roared back as one, echoing off the mountains like the oath of a metal army. Emma stood frozen, her small heart pounding like it would burst from her chest. Moose gently pushed Emma out onto the porch, so she stood beside Jake. And when Emma stepped outside, snow falling on her hair like white feathers, the entire sea of leather and steel. Over 100 bikers bowed their heads in unison, not a polite dip, a bow like before a lighthouse in a storm. Emma's throat closed, she couldn't speak. She just gripped Jake's hand tight. The wind paused for a beat, snow fell softer, as if nature itself was listening. Odin stepped forward, no weapon in hand, and dropped to one knee in the snow. "Little girl, we didn't come because of the storm, not because of one phone call. We came because of you. You kept the light Frank Carter left behind. You are his last light." Emma tried to speak, but only managed a tearful nod. The biker from Nebraska opened his truck and started unloading things. Emma could hardly believe. Bags of food, boxes of milk, bread, canned meat, rice, water, enough to feed a family for weeks. The man from South Dakota brought out a big construction-grade generator, heavy cables dragging through the snow. The one from Montana carried down a giant basket of dry, seasoned firewood, something the cabin hadn't had all winter. Another group hauled new planks, new nails, tools, even a sheet metal roof panel wrapped in tarp. They didn't ask permission. They didn't wait. They didn't hesitate. They worked like it was their own house. Moose laughed hoarsely. Emma, you won't ever have to worry about this cabin being cold again. Another biker pointed at the roof. We fixed the roof first. One more leak and the whole place freezes. A guy from Utah shouted, burn all the old wood. Tonight this house is summer warm. Jake turned to Emma, voice low. Tonight nobody in this house is cold. Nobody. Emma looked around, snow falling, headlights glowing, engines winding down, footsteps in the storm, huge men lining up like living walls of steel. She didn't understand everything that was happening, only that she was in the middle of the strangest miracle of her life. A miracle made of leather, steel, and brotherhood. And as the bikers started working in the snow, putting up scaffolding, fixing the roof, blocking drafts, building bigger fires, little Emma Carter understood that her entire life had just changed forever. Because over 100 Iron Serpents had come, not to take shelter from the storm, not out of pity, but to repay a light. The light Frank once gave. The light Emma had kept burning, and from that second on, the little porch light of the Carter cabin was no longer just a beacon for lost travelers. It became the immortal symbol of kindness that had ridden the long road for 20 years. A light that over 100 leather-clad men had bowed to in the fiercest blizzard night. A light the world outside would never forget by the name Carter. In the dim glow of dawn, breaking after the storm, the Iron Serpents spread across the Carter cabin like a silent army used to fighting in the worst conditions nature could throw at them. Hammer blows rang out on the old roof like the reviving heartbeat of the cabin. New boards were lifted to replace the rotten sections torn open in last night's storm, and metal sheets taken from trucks were reinforced over the drafty spots to keep the cold out for the whole winter. Moose stood on the roof, barehanded and unshivering, driving each nail as if trying to hammer his own warmth into the wood. Dusty and others sealed every window and door crack with rubber strips and weather stripping pulled from their own bike saddlebags, while Bear installed a huge wind-block panel right at the front door, grumbling but warm. This cabin's gonna stand another 20 years no matter how crazy the storms get. The men from Colorado and Utah dug drainage trenches around the foundation so snow wouldn't pile up, then set up a temporary wind wall with army tarps, things they always carried on long rides. The guy from Nebraska carefully positioned the big generator by the window, ran the cable safely through a gap and fired it up. The engine roared to life like a second heart for the house. The cabin lights blazed bright, making Emma jump and clutch her bear, eyes huge as if she hadn't seen electric light in weeks. She whispered, "The lights. They're on." Jake stood behind her, arms crossed, watching the pack work in the snow like summoned iron wolves, and nodded with quiet satisfaction. "This house is lit because it deserves to be lit," he said softly. Beside the cabin, 3 bikers worked on a large hand-cut wooden plank, one carved, one sanded. The third, an old biker with silver hair and slightly trembling hands, carefully painted each letter. When they turned and carried the sign over, Emma almost dropped her blanket in shock. The sign was half the size of Moose, hand-carved and painted bold black and gold. Lighthouse of Highway 14, safe haven for travelers. It wasn't just beautiful. It was a tribute, a testament to what Frank had done for 20 years and what Emma had carried on in one single night. Moose planted the sign in the middle of the snowy yard, drove the post deep, hammering until snow flew up like fireworks. When it stood straight, the first rays of morning sun hit the letters and made them glow like hot metal fresh from the forge. Every biker stopped for a moment. No one spoke, they just looked, as if it wasn't a sign, but the headstone of an oath they had just sworn. When Emma stepped out, Moose gently pulled her close. "Kid, this is your house, and your grandpa's. From now on, every traveler who passes will know there's still one place that never closes its door." Emma reached out and touched the letters with trembling little fingers, pride and emotion shaking her. She turned back, tears rolling down. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Bear walked up, hiding something behind his back. Everyone stepped back into a circle, clearing the way. With a face both serious and uncharacteristically shy, Bear dropped to one knee and held out to Emma a small black leather jacket, cut perfectly for a child. Black leather, built tough like theirs, and on the back, beneath a miniature Iron Serpents patch, white letters read, "Little Serpent." Emma covered her mouth, speechless. Bear's voice came out rough. "Kid, we don't give patches to children. Ever. But you did what a lot of grown men on the road wouldn't dare. You opened the door in the storm. You saved your brothers." Moose added, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime honor." The old silver-haired biker spoke slowly. "You're not a member, but your family." Dusty slipped the jacket onto Emma's shoulders. It fit like it was custom-made for her alone. "You look tougher than any biker I've ever met." Dusty laughed hoarsely, wiping tears with the back of his scarred hand. Emma turned to look at Grandpa Frank, who was propped up in bed inside the cabin, breathing steadier thanks to the bikers who had kept him warm all night. He saw the jacket, saw the patch, saw the sign, saw his little granddaughter surrounded by over 100 men who had once seen him as a legend, and in that moment Frank Carter, the man who had endured colder nights than last night's storm, who almost never cried, broke down. Not weak tears. The tears of a father, a grandfather, a man who had just watched love come full circle after 20 years on the road. Emma ran and hugged him, and he managed through trembling breath. "I'm so proud of you, and of them." Jake stood beside the bed, and bowed his head to Frank like before a leader. "Sir, you're the reason we're even alive today." The old man shakily placed a hand on Jake's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for keeping your word." Another biker stepped into the cabin and lightly tapped the doorframe with his glove. "Time to ride, kid." Emma startled and turned to the faces she had known only hours, yet would never forget for the rest of her life. The goodbyes began. Gentle, low, sincere as the earth's own breath. "Stay warm, little serpent. Don't ever turn off the porch light. Brothers will be back. Your grandpa's tough. We'll see you again. If anybody touches this house, they answer to us." Jake was the last to leave the porch. He crouched to Emma's level, gripped her shoulders with both hands, eyes deep as a mountain dawn sky. "Emma Carter, today you relit a legend's light. And from now on, that light belongs to all of us." He stood, walked out into the snow, turned back one last time. The Carter family is Iron Serpents family. 100 engines fired up together, shaking the whole valley that roar like a metal hymn saying goodbye to a tiny lighthouse in the storm. Emma stood on the porch, the new jacket hugging her small body but her heart already bigger than the house, watching the bikers ride away in a long line, tires kicking up snow that sparkled like stars. And she understood, tonight they hadn't just fixed her house, they had fixed the whole world inside her heart. 6 months after that blizzard night, the little Carter cabin on Highway 14 was no longer a poor, broken-down wooden house threatened by storms. It had become a legendary stop talked about at every gas station from Sheridan to Rapid City, Cheyenne to Billings, a place every long-haul traveler knew as Lighthouse of Highway 14, the last light guiding those on the road. Winter passed, spring came, snow melted layer by layer, revealing ground that had been leveled and cleared by bikers who kept coming back for 4 straight months, week after week, in groups, some with shovels, some with picks, some with new lumber to reinforce the cabin even though it was already solid. On the front wall, the big wooden sign Moose and the Colorado crew had built had darkened a bit in the sun, but the letters still stood out bold every afternoon. Lighthouse of Highway 14, safe haven for travelers. People stopped just to take pictures with it. People stopped to hear the story. People stopped to tell their own. Emma, now a full 12 years old, a few inches taller with longer hair, still felt her heart warm every time someone said Frank Carter, like the echo of engines in that snowy night. Frank was stronger, no longer bedridden thanks to medicine, a new oxygen machine, and the steady care of the bikers. Because yes, they came back, very often, each chapter taking turns, sometimes several times a month. Some days only 3 Harleys pulled in to drop off canned food, gallons of water, or just to check if the wind had damaged a corner. Other days a group of 15 showed up just to shovel snow and clear the whole driveway so an ambulance could get through if needed. And on beautiful afternoons when Frank sat in his wooden chair on the porch and Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, they would spot tiny black specks on the horizon. Harleys and no another Iron Serpents crew was coming to visit family. Little Serpent. Dusty was always the first to call her name, even though he'd never admit to being the emotional type. Bear usually brought a small handmade leather toy, Moose loved retelling the night the cabin almost got swallowed by the storm, but they saved it. The oldest biker in the Wyoming Ridge chapter always slipped a bag of peppermint candies into Emma's hand like she was still 5. And Jake, Redwood Jake, not the smiling kind, always let a soft mountain breeze smile show when he arrived. The smile of a man who knew this place had become part of his life. One June evening, as the sun sank behind the Bighorn Peaks and the cabin glowed gold in the sunset, the CB radio Jake had given Emma in spring crackled to life with its familiar hiss. Then a voice came over the air. "Breaker 1-4 calling Lighthouse. Little Serpent, you copy?" Emma jumped up, ran to the table, flipped the switch, grabbed the mic, voice bright with the same joy it always held when the bikers called. "Lighthouse copies loud and clear. Little Serpent copies loud and clear. How's it look tonight?" Moose's gravelly voice asked. Emma smiled and glanced at the porch where the light was on every night. A promise never broken, lights still burning, doors still open, roads always wide for family. Frank sat behind her, listening to every word, old eyes shining with deep pride. The radio hissed again, then Dusty laughed warmly. "Keep that light on, kid. 10 minutes out. Got a present for you." Emma looked out at the road where sunset was turning to deep blue. A soft wind carried the smell of dry grass and damp earth into the cabin. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Emma stepped onto the porch on tiptoes, placed her hand on the wooden sign as if it were Frank's message to the long road world. And then, as if the earth itself took a breath to sing a steel song, the sound of engines rose from far away, low, steady, deep, like an entire pack of iron wolves running through the fading light. Headlights appeared before the riders did, cutting through thin mist like shooting stars falling down the mountain. Frank placed a hand on Emma's shoulder, voice soft as breath. "Hear that, Emma?" She nodded, eyes bright. "I hear it, Grandpa. That's a promise," he said. "A promise from people who never forget a debt." And when the first Harleys appeared, slowing in front of the cabin, engines growling like the oldest, toughest greeting in the biker world, Emma Carter understood that the light of the Carter cabin, the light Frank had once lit, the light she had saved in that blizzard night, would never go out again. Because in this big cold world there are roads that go on forever, but there are always bikers who will ride every mile of them, just to come back to the place that once saved them, the place they call by one name only, home. If you love heart-touching stories like this, please hit subscribe to ride with us every day, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional journey.